Hello everyone and welcome to this quick audio tutorial. I'm going to show you how I set up my mixing projects in terms of routing and buses and auxiliary tracks and such like that, and to make basically the mixing stage easier. And it's quite nifty, some little nifty tricks that I do when setting up my mixing projects. So right now I have a blank project, and this is in Logic Pro 9. Basically, in most DAWs, this will work. DAW stands for Digital Analog Workstations. So the one thing I'm not sure about is GarageBand, because that is one of the most basic strange programs that you will ever use. But Pro Tools, Reaper, of course Logic, Cubase should have this functionality because it is, a semi to professional program. So basically, I just want to import my tracks now, and what I'm going to do is I've got a song that I recorded a while ago, but I'm going to just import all the content and nothing else. Oops, so I guess it didn't work the way I wanted it to. So literally all I'm doing now is going to import the audio files into this project, so I don't get mixed up in what I've already mixed. So this is just going to be the raw audio files. So literally content is checked, add, and here we go. All these files are audio files. Some of them seem to be stereo, which is not the best idea. This was from a good year or two ago when I made this track, so some mistakes were made when bouncing down. If this is if these are stereo tracks, like, no, it says mono down here. See, that'll be stereo, that'll be mono. Okay then, so this was mostly sequenced. So basically, when you're sequencing things, the first tip I can give you is always set your regions and bounce it down to a lossless audio file. You can either do it at 44.1 sampling rate, 44.1 kilohertz, or 48. But make sure they are all the same. As long as they are all 44.1 or all 48 or above, then that'll be fine, because then you won't lose any clarity and such. So always do that for every single one. I know it may be tedious to do every track one by one, but it saves a lot of CPU power, because if you're doing it from the sample bank, it's got to first render the samples. Like, it's got to first say, okay, it's at this MIDI note, which means it's at this velocity, which means it needs this audio file, and then you're doing your mixing on it, so it needs to change this part of this audio file, and it uses up quite a bit of CPU, and it's just useless. So always bounce down to audio files and mix with that. So the main thing that I'm going to go into is channel routing, and I'm just going to, well, the main focus even is the drums, so I'm not going to use anything else really. Let's just have a listen to how it sounds as is. So this is completely unmixed, and you can see my output is peaked already and stuff like that, but we won't be bothering with that. So what I'm going to do is mute all of these. So what we have is the drums. So let's just get to a section where the drums have come in. So basically all we're hearing is the drums. I'll get rid of that track because I don't need it. Now, what I like to do with groups of tracks, so like all the drums, all the guitars, all the strings and stuff like that, I section them off into individual groups so I can then edit them at a time. So this is one of the great things about DAWs, is you can do this so easily by looking at the output. Now, at the moment, the output is going to stereo out, which is where everything else is going, and you can edit stereo out in this track here. This track is basically a master fader. At the moment, it's acting as a master fader, even though there is already a master fader. If I look at the mixer, there should be a master fader, but at the moment these two are basically identical, but the only difference is the output. You can do inserts, so that's telling me it's an auxiliary track or a bus. Buses are interesting. It's a send, basically. A bus is a send, which is an auxiliary. Depending on which program you're using, they are one and the same, or they can be different. Buses are handy for putting effects or the same effect on multiple tracks, but with using less CPU power. So For example, let's put bus 1 on the kick and on the snare. So these both have bus 1 going into them. Let's just give it a level. And now we look at bus 1, and it's got auxiliary 1 here. So if we put a reverb on bus 1, mono reverb, let's just have it completely ridiculous and see how that sounds. Turn it up a bit more. Mute all these. So the kick has a reverb, but the snare also has the reverb, and it is the exact same reverb that they're just sharing it through the bus, which is using less CPU power because you're not having a plug-in for each channel strip or track. So that's a neat thing to do. But the buses also work for routing. So I'm going to take this off now and have it as no send. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to route the output of each drum instrument or drum track into a bus. So let's go on to stereo out, and it's got output stereo or surround depending on what you want, but we're going to go for bus, and let's start from bus 2. Okay, so the kick is routed into bus 2. I'm going to route the rest of them into bus 2 as well, and it should turn into a stereo auxiliary track. Okay, so all my drum tracks are now coming out through bus 2. You can see its output is bus 2, and I'm going to, and this is bus 2 here, see its input is here, and I'm going to set this to read. So now we have the auxiliary track literally as a fader in with the rest of our drums. So the unique thing about this, well, the good thing about this is now we can control everything that's happening in the drums on this fader. Basically we can control a lot. So if I solo this, press play, the drums are still coming out. That's just because I've soloed all the drums. Even if I remove all of these, so everything's playing, it's still just the drums because I've soloed this auxiliary track which just has the drums coming through them. And now I'm going to mute them all again. One of the handy things about this is you can apply basically effects to all of these instruments now just using this auxiliary track. So I can apply a master reverb to all of the drums to give them a more mixed together feel, so like they're in it's all actually recorded in one room and stuff if you're using samples. So press play. See, now the entirety of the now all the drums have a reverb on, and it's ridiculous, I know, it's just so you notice the reverb as an example. But also, oh, sorry about that, I need to make this quick. Another main point is if I press play now, I can also change the volume of the drums without doing every single fader one by one to get it. So once I've got the drums kind of balanced out into levels that I want, so I like how loud the kick is compared to the snare, and the snare is compared to the overheads. Let me just turn the ambient down because it's an ambient, and then I think, okay, but the entirety of the drums themselves, they sound really quiet. What I can do is I can just change the volume in the master fader, and this will change all of the levels, but it will not change the individual balancing that you've done. So if I press play now, I can just bring the drums down, all of them, every single drum part, and they stay at the relative volumes that they've been assigned, but they just get quieter as a group. And bring them back up. And that's basically the basics of channel routing. As I was saying, it can be done in most DAWs these days. Some might not, well, most that support auxiliary tracks or buses or sends. So if you section off each one before you start mixing, it will make your job a lot easier. And I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I will be back again soon with more mixing tips.